A state of emergency has been declared by Matawa First Nations over the safety and well-being of Indigenous children and families across both Thunder Bay and across Northern Ontario. I'm James Murray, reporting for NetNewsLedger from Thunder Bay. Matawa First Nation Chiefs say that federal delays and unstable funding are putting vital support services at risk of collapse, and they're warning that the consequences will be felt both here in Thunder Bay and across the north. In a strongly worded letter addressed to Indigenous Services Minister Mandy Galmasti, the Matawa First Nations Chiefs Council has declared a state of emergency for their children, youth, and families. They say the crisis is not an accident, but the predictable outcome of systemic failures inside Indigenous Services Canada, including chronic funding delays, denials, and narrow interpretations of programs like Jordan's Principles and First Nation Representative Services. The Chiefs assert that the solutions are already known, that the tools exist, and what's missing is the political will in the Mark Carney Liberal government to honor commitments to First Nation children. Matawa's declaration has direct ties to Thunder Bay. Many families from Matawa communities come to the city for education, health, and child welfare services. At the core of Matawa's concern is a social services framework that is community-led and designed to keep children safely connected to their families, cultures, and home communities. Matawa's First Nations social services and child and family welfare system was created in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action on child welfare. It was built on 4 pillars: a family transitional unit providing safe housing and 24/7 support for children and families involved in child welfare; family support, off-reserve case management and prevention supports; post-majority care, helping children aging out of care with housing, life skills, and mental health supports; and finally, service coordination, making sure children with unmet needs get timely and appropriate help. Matawa says these programs have stabilized hundreds of families, prevented unnecessary child apprehensions, and helped to close thousands of child welfare files. But because of the federal indecision and funding delays, Matawa Chiefs warn that these services are now in danger. Without immediate action from Ottawa, Matawa says it's bracing for a major funding cliff on March 31st, 2026. According to the Chiefs Council, 30 of 38 staff positions could be terminated. 82 active family support files and 53 youth in post-majority care could lose services. 4 families in Matawa's family transition unit could be left without safe, supported housing. Matawa says other service providers in Ontario have already indicated they can't absorb these clients, raising fear that many children and families will be left with nowhere to turn. The letter warns some families and youth have already gone into crisis after learning the services might end. For Matawa leaders, this moment is really part of a much larger story. They link the current crisis to a legacy from residential schools, the Sixties Scoop, and the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in care, a phenomenon they refer to as the Millennial Scoop. They say that while Canada has promised reconciliation, Indigenous children are still being taken into care at far higher rates than non-Indigenous children, and in some cases higher than during the residential school era. Matawa also points out that the problems they're facing are being echoed by other First Nations in Ontario. We've already reported on how Chief Donnie Morris from KI up in Northern Ontario has their community-led family, law, and service model only guaranteed 2 more years of funding. That doesn't allow the First Nation leadership and KETO, as KI's First Nation family law system is known, to actually plan and to make things better for the families they're supposed to help. The Matawa Chiefs highlight delays in rolling out Ontario's final settlement agreement, a multi-billion-dollar child welfare agreement that was supposed to help fund First Nations-run prevention programs and supports for youth up to age 26. That agreement is currently stalled before the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal over concerns about whether the funding will be stable and adequate for future generations. The Matawa Chiefs letter warns that tying funding to an ongoing legal process means real families are left waiting, even though programs and staff are already in place and ready to deliver services. They argue that funding for First Nations children should not be used as leverage in legal or political battles. So, exactly what is Matawa asking from Ottawa? In their State of Emergency declaration, the Chiefs Council lays out several key demands. First, immediate bridge funding so no services end on March 31st, 2026. Long-term, enforceable funding agreements instead of year-to-year extensions. Real, child-first implementation of the Jordan's Principle and First Nation representative services, and a commitment not to tie essential funding for child and family services to legal tactics or tribunal deadlines and timelines. Matawa Chiefs are also saying it's time for a true partnership with First Nations, supporting community-designed solutions instead of imposing a one-size-fits-all model. Matawa is calling for an urgent meeting between the minister, Matawa leadership, and staff to co-create an emergency plan that protects staff, stabilizes programs, and ensures that no child is left without support because of funding delays. At the heart of that warning in the letter is also hope. The Chiefs say that their children and youth carry the weight of generations of loss, but also the futures of their languages, laws, and culture. They argue that allowing community-led services to falter sends a dangerous message. It says that the safety and well-being of Indigenous children is negotiable and subject to political or bureaucratic timelines. Matawa firmly rejects that idea and is calling on Canada to do the same. The Matawa Chiefs Council says the state of emergency is not symbolic, but is a reflection on what families are experiencing right now in Thunder Bay and across Northern Ontario. Now, there has not yet been a detailed public response from the minister or from Indigenous Services Canada to the specific demands in the letter. NetNewsLedger will continue to follow this story and its impact on children and families in our region. If you or someone you know is struggling and needs support, local mental health and crisis services are available 24/7 through regional health providers and crisis lines. For NetNewsLedger National News, I'm James Murray in Thunder Bay. Stay tuned. This is going to be a big story.